Some of the attitudes I'm getting from the family don't give me peace about their behavior.
Welcome back to The Life with the Browns. Kody Brown has always been the kind of man who needed attention the same way fire needs oxygen. For years, he controlled every room he walked into with loud opinions, dramatic exits, and emotional speeches that somehow always pulled the spotlight back onto him. Whether the cameras were rolling during tense family meetings or the wives were trying to explain their feelings, Kody always found a way to make himself the center of the moment. But now, something has changed, and for perhaps the first time in his entire public life, the silence surrounding him is louder than anything he has ever shouted. The women who once built their lives around him are no longer waiting for his approval, no longer chasing his affection, and no longer treating him like the center of their universe. Christine, Janelle, and Mary have stepped into an entirely different chapter, and what makes this transformation so powerful is that they did not need to destroy Kody publicly to do it. They simply moved on. That quiet independence has become the one thing Kody cannot seem to handle. For years, he believed he was the glue holding the Brown family together. He thought the show revolved around his leadership and his personality. But now the spotlight has shifted completely, and the viewers who once tuned in for the chaos of plural marriage are now showing up to watch three women rebuild themselves without him. Christine is traveling the world with confidence she never showed during the early seasons. Janelle is turning her calm wisdom into a growing brand that fans deeply connect with. And Mary, once seen as the saddest figure in the family, is suddenly laughing louder than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Kody is standing in the background watching the audience drift away from him in real time. The most painful part for him is not the criticism. Kody has survived years of backlash and public judgment. The thing tearing at him now is irrelevance. People are no longer arguing about him because they are too busy celebrating the women he underestimated for years. Fans scroll through social media and see freedom instead of dysfunction. They see healing instead of heartbreak. They see women finally becoming themselves after decades of emotional compromise. Every smiling photo from Christine, every quiet business move from Janelle, and every carefree live stream from Mary sends the exact same message without ever speaking his name. Life goes on after Kody Brown. And according to people close to the situation, that reality is hitting him harder than anyone realizes. Behind closed doors, insiders claim he feels like the story is slipping away from him one day at a time. He watches interviews, social media comments, and fan pages that barely mention him anymore unless it is to compare who he used to be with who these women have become. For a man who once believed he was the star of the entire franchise, that kind of silence feels brutal. Because the truth Kody never prepared for is this: the audience did not stay because of him. They stayed because they connected to the women who endured him. And now those same women are finally discovering what life looks like without carrying the emotional weight of his ego on their shoulders. What makes this shift even more dramatic is how naturally it happened. There was no giant press conference announcing the end of Kody's control over the narrative. There was no explosive television special where the OG3 sat together and declared independence. Instead, it happened slowly, almost quietly, through small moments that fans immediately recognized as signs of freedom. Christine posting joyful travel photos from Europe. Janelle smiling beside her grandchildren while promoting her newest products online. Mary laughing uncontrollably during live streams with her best friend Jen, as if years of emotional heaviness had suddenly been lifted from her shoulders. These moments may look simple on the surface, but for longtime viewers, they represent something much bigger. They represent women who no longer feel emotionally trapped. Fans are noticing every detail. Christine's confidence no longer feels forced. Janelle's calmness no longer feels like silent suffering. And Mary's humor no longer feels like a mask hiding heartbreak. Together, they have unintentionally created a completely new dynamic around the Sister Wives universe. One where Kody is no longer the center of gravity. The comments under their posts say everything. People are cheering for these women like they escaped something painful and finally found peace. Viewers are calling Christine radiant, praising Janelle for her strength, and saying Mary seems happier than she has in decades. The support pouring toward them is overwhelming, and what makes it even more powerful is that none of it depends on Kody anymore. Years ago, every storyline somehow circled back to him. His anger, his frustrations, his relationships, his rules. Now the audience is emotionally invested in something entirely different. Healing. Reinvention. Independence. According to insiders, this shift has created tension behind the scenes because Kody reportedly believed he would always remain the face of the franchise. He allegedly struggles watching producers and fans become more interested in the women's personal growth than his opinions about plural marriage. Sources claim he has privately complained that the show no longer feels centered around him, which may explain why he has reportedly been pushing for more solo appearances and personal segments. But the harsh reality is that viewers are connecting more deeply with authenticity than control. They no longer want dramatic speeches from a frustrated patriarch demanding loyalty. They want to see women rediscovering themselves after years of emotional exhaustion. That emotional connection is exactly why the OG3 continue gaining momentum online, while Kody's public image grows weaker. Fans no longer view him as the complicated leader of a unique family. More and more, they see him as the man who failed to recognize the value of the women standing beside him until it was too late. And perhaps the most ironic part of all is that the women are not even trying to expose him directly. They are simply living openly and honestly. That quiet confidence is far more powerful than any angry confrontation could ever be. Every photo, every live stream, every interview without bitterness becomes another reminder that peace can sometimes be the loudest response of all. Kody spent years believing authority made him important, but the audience is beginning to understand something different. What truly kept this family together was never his leadership. It was the emotional labor, patience, and sacrifices of the women now learning how to live without him. As the attention surrounding the OG3 continues to grow, Kody Brown reportedly finds himself growing more frustrated by the day. According to people close to the production side of things, he never expected the audience to emotionally disconnect from him this quickly. For years, he believed the drama surrounding his marriages guaranteed that he would always remain the centerpiece of the franchise. Even when viewers criticized him, he still believed attention meant power. But now something entirely different is happening. Fans are no longer hate-watching Kody. Many are simply ignoring him altogether. And for someone who spent years demanding loyalty, respect, and constant validation, being ignored feels far worse than being criticized. Social media has become the clearest example of this shift. Christine's pages are filled with excitement surrounding her travels, her marriage, and her upcoming memoir. Fans celebrate every photo she posts like they are watching someone finally breathe after years underwater. Janelle's online presence feels calm but powerful, filled with motivational messages, family moments, and subtle reminders that peace can exist after emotional chaos. And then there is Mary, whose transformation may be the most shocking of all. Once viewed as emotionally broken and isolated, she now appears playful, confident, and unexpectedly funny during live streams with her friend Jen. The chemistry between them has become one of the most talked about dynamics in the fandom. Viewers are especially fascinated by how little the women mention Kody anymore. They are not constantly attacking him or dragging him publicly. In fact, the absence of his name has become the loudest statement possible. Fans have noticed that these women seem genuinely happier when they are not centering their lives around him anymore. That realization has changed how many longtime viewers interpret older episodes of the show. Moments that once looked like ordinary marital disagreements now appear much darker in hindsight. Fans are rewatching scenes and noticing how often the women minimize their own feelings just to avoid upsetting Kody. The audience is beginning to understand how emotionally exhausting that environment truly was. According to insiders, this growing support for the OG3 has deeply affected Kody behind the scenes. Sources claim he has become increasingly frustrated watching the public praise the women while his own image continues to weaken. He allegedly feels betrayed by how quickly the narrative turned against him once the marriages started falling apart publicly. In his mind, he spent years carrying the pressure of leading a complicated family, and now he reportedly feels like nobody acknowledges the sacrifices he believes he made. But fans see things differently. Many viewers argue that the women were the ones carrying the emotional burden all along while Kody focused on control, authority, and appearances. What makes this entire situation even more painful for Kody is the fact that the women are succeeding without needing the show to define them anymore. Christine is building a completely new identity outside the family structure that once limited her. Janelle is quietly turning her personality and life experience into a successful brand that resonates deeply with women who see themselves in her story. And Mary, who once looked emotionally defeated, is suddenly attracting audiences through humor, honesty, and freedom. Together, they are proving something Kody never expected. The Brown family story was never truly about the patriarch. It was about the women who survived him, supported each other, and eventually realized they deserved more than the life they had been settling for. As the popularity of the OG3 continues to rise, rumors surrounding Kody Brown's growing desperation have started spreading faster than ever. According to multiple insiders, Kody has become increasingly obsessed with reclaiming control over the public narrative. For years, he was used to every major storyline revolving around him. The arguments, the family meetings, the emotional breakdowns, even the reconciliations somehow always circled back to Kody and his authority within the family. But now, the spotlight has shifted in a way he never expected, and sources claim he is struggling to accept the reality that viewers no longer see him as the heart of the show. In fact, many fans now view him as the obstacle the women had to overcome in order to finally find peace. That shift reportedly pushed Kody toward a dramatic new idea. Insiders claim he has been privately pitching the concept of a solo television special focused entirely on his perspective. The goal, according to those familiar with the discussions, would be to finally tell his side without interruptions from the wives or producers shaping the conversation around him. Kody allegedly believes the audience has misunderstood his intentions for years and that he deserves a chance to explain the emotional pressure he faced while trying to manage such a large and complicated family. In his mind, this special would help repair his damaged image and remind viewers why the Brown family became famous in the first place. But the reaction behind the scenes has reportedly been far less enthusiastic than Kody expected. According to whispers coming from production circles, many executives are hesitant about building an entire project around Kody alone because the audience engagement simply is not where it used to be. While Christine's interviews generate excitement and Janelle's projects continue attracting loyal support, Kody's recent appearances have reportedly struggled to create the same emotional connection with viewers. Producers allegedly understand something Kody still refuses to fully accept. Fans are no longer invested in watching him defend himself. They're invested in watching the women rebuild their lives after leaving him behind. Sources claim Kody has privately complained that the women would never have become public figures without him. He reportedly feels frustrated seeing them profit from stories, quotes, and experiences connected to the family dynamic he believes he created. But fans online continue pushing back against that idea. Many argue that the women became beloved precisely because audiences watched them endure emotional neglect, favoritism, and disappointment for years while still trying to hold the family together. In other words, the audience's loyalty was built through empathy for the wives, not admiration for Kody's leadership. Meanwhile, the women themselves continue responding in the most powerful way possible: silence. Christine keeps posting joyful updates from her travels and public appearances. Janelle focuses on her business projects and peaceful family moments. Mary continues laughing through live streams with an energy fans never thought they would see from her again. None of them appear interested in publicly fighting Kody for attention, and ironically, that calm detachment only seems to make him more frustrated. Every time the women thrive without mentioning him, it becomes harder for Kody to convince himself that he still controls the narrative. And perhaps that is the biggest emotional blow of all. Kody spent years believing he was the foundation holding everything together, but now the audience is watching the women flourish after stepping away from his control. Their confidence grows stronger with every interview, every business launch, and every moment of visible peace. Meanwhile, Kody reportedly remains stuck trying to recapture a version of the spotlight that no longer exists. Because the truth viewers are beginning to realize is simple but devastating. The Brown family story did not survive because of Kody Brown. It survived because 3 women carried the emotional weight of that family long enough to finally choose themselves. Out of all the transformations happening inside the sister wives world, Meri Brown's glow-up may be the one nobody saw coming. For years, she was viewed as the emotionally wounded wife who stayed loyal long after her marriage had emotionally collapsed. Viewers watched her sit through awkward conversations, forced family gatherings, and heartbreaking moments where Kody openly admitted he no longer saw a future with her. There were seasons where Meri looked completely emotionally drained, almost like she was holding herself together out of pure habit rather than hope. But now, something about her energy feels completely different, and fans cannot stop talking about it. The woman who once looked trapped inside years of sadness is suddenly laughing again, joking freely, and acting more confident than she has in decades. Much of this transformation has become visible through her live streams and online appearances with her best friend Jen. What started as casual videos quickly turned into one of the most entertaining dynamics in the fandom. Their playful chemistry, inside jokes, and chaotic humor have created an atmosphere that feels surprisingly genuine compared to the heavy emotional tension viewers became used to seeing on television. Fans now tune into Meri's content not out of sympathy, but because they genuinely enjoy watching her personality finally shine without fear or emotional restraint. For many longtime viewers, that shift feels deeply satisfying because they spent years watching Meri slowly lose pieces of herself inside a marriage that no longer gave her affection, reassurance, or emotional security. What makes these live streams so fascinating is the subtle confidence Meri now carries. She no longer seems desperate for validation. She no longer looks like someone waiting for Kody to change his mind. Instead, she appears completely comfortable creating a life that does not revolve around him at all. Fans especially notice how naturally she jokes now, sometimes making playful comments that would have seemed impossible during the earlier years of the show. The audience is seeing a version of Meri that feels younger, lighter, and emotionally freer. And according to insiders, Kody reportedly did not expect this transformation at all. Sources claim he assumed Meri would always remain emotionally tied to him in some way, even after their relationship officially ended. But now the dynamic has completely changed. Meri's growing confidence is attracting support from viewers who once overlooked her entirely. Some fans even believe she may be preparing for something much bigger behind the scenes. Rumors of a podcast, personal project, or independent media platform have started circulating online because viewers sense there are still many stories Meri has not fully told. And honestly, fans are eager to hear them. They believe Meri spent years protecting family secrets and minimizing her own emotional pain for the sake of keeping peace inside the Brown family structure. Now that she no longer seems afraid of disappointing Kody, people wonder how much she may eventually reveal about what life inside that family was truly like. Even the smallest comments Meri makes online now generate huge reactions from fans. A vague quote about healing. A subtle joke about freedom. A comment about finally choosing peace. Viewers immediately begin analyzing every detail because they sense years of suppressed emotions sitting quietly underneath her humor. And while Meri rarely addresses Kody directly anymore, many fans believe her silence says more than any angry speech ever could. She no longer appears emotionally controlled by the relationship that once defined her entire identity. Perhaps the most powerful part of Meri's transformation is that it feels authentic rather than performative. She is not trying to become an influencer overnight or force a dramatic reinvention. Instead, she simply looks like someone slowly rediscovering who she is after spending years emotionally shrinking herself to fit inside a relationship that no longer loved her properly. That quiet rediscovery resonates deeply with viewers, especially women who understand what it feels like to lose themselves while trying to keep other people happy. And as Meri's confidence continues growing, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The version of Mary Brown that Kody once took for granted no longer exists. In her place stands a woman finally realizing she deserves joy, freedom, and a life that does not require anyone's permission. While Mary's transformation is capturing attention for its emotional healing, Janelle Brown's journey is being seen as something entirely different, something quieter but far more strategic. For years, Janelle was the voice of logic inside the Brown family, the one who often tried to de-escalate conflict while keeping her own emotions tightly controlled. She rarely raised her voice, rarely demanded attention, and often appeared to carry the weight of stability for everyone else. But now, fans are watching a version of Janelle that feels grounded, independent, and surprisingly powerful in her stillness. She is no longer just reacting to chaos. She is building something of her own. Much of that shift is tied to her growing presence in the business world. Through online merchandise, personal branding, and lifestyle content, Janelle has managed to turn her quiet personality into a strong connection with viewers who appreciate authenticity over drama. Her posts are not overly polished or theatrical. Instead, they feel real, intentional, and deeply relatable. Fans often describe her as the most down-to-earth member of the entire Brown family, someone who represents resilience without needing to announce it loudly. And that relatability has quietly turned into influence as her audience continues to grow with each passing month. One of the most talked about aspects of Janelle's new chapter is her involvement in her family's land and farming vision. What was once introduced as a hopeful long-term dream has now become a subject of intense curiosity among fans. Many supporters initially viewed it as a symbolic fresh start, a chance for Janelle to build something meaningful away from the emotional chaos of her past life. But as time has passed, questions have started to surface. Progress appears slow, updates remain limited, and followers are beginning to wonder what is actually happening behind the scenes. Despite this curiosity, Janelle has remained calm and measured in her responses, never feeding into speculation or drama. That silence, however, has not weakened her support. If anything, it has strengthened it. Fans interpret her restraint as maturity rather than avoidance. They see a woman who is not rushing to prove anything, not forcing updates for public approval, and not allowing outside pressure to dictate her timeline. Instead, she appears focused on building something sustainable, even if it takes longer than expected. And in a world where instant results are expected, that patience stands out. At the same time, Janelle's financial independence has become a major talking point. Her merchandise line, filled with empowering quotes and subtle references to her personal journey, has become surprisingly successful. Fans wear her products not just as clothing, but as symbols of personal growth and emotional resilience. Quotes that once reflected difficult moments inside her marriage are now being reinterpreted as statements of strength and survival. And that transformation has not gone unnoticed by Kody Brown. According to insiders, Kody reportedly feels frustrated watching Janelle monetize experiences that were once part of their shared family narrative. There are whispers that he believes some of the phrases used in her branding originated during their time together and therefore should not be used without his involvement. While none of these claims have been publicly confirmed, they have added another layer of tension to an already complicated dynamic. Fans, however, largely dismiss the idea that Kody still holds influence over these stories. In their view, Janelle is simply reclaiming her voice and turning lived experience into empowerment. What makes Janelle's evolution so impactful is that it does not rely on confrontation. She is not publicly arguing, not engaging in emotional battles, and not seeking validation from the past. Instead, she is building a life that quietly replaces everything she once tolerated. And that shift is what makes her transformation so powerful. Because sometimes the most meaningful form of independence is not loud rebellion. It is simply consistency, peace, and the decision to no longer participate in what once caused pain. And in Janelle's case, that decision appears to be paying off in every possible way. As the OG3 continue to build completely separate lives, Kody Brown is reportedly becoming more fixated on the one thing he feels slipping away from him the most: control over the narrative. For years, he was able to define how the world saw his family. Through interviews, confessionals, and carefully framed conversations on camera, Kody positioned himself as the central authority of a complicated household. Even when tensions were high, even when disagreements were public, he still had the ability to shape how the story was told. But now, that influence appears to be fading fast, and according to insiders, that loss is becoming increasingly difficult for him to accept. Sources close to production suggest that Kody has been attempting to reassert his presence in discussions about the future of the franchise. There are ongoing whispers that he has expressed interest in larger personal segments, more focused screen time, and even standalone content that would center entirely around his perspective. In his mind, this is not about ego. It is about correction. He reportedly believes the audience has only seen fragments of his experience and that a more complete version of events would shift public perception in his favor. However, the response behind the scenes has reportedly been cautious. Executives are aware that viewer interest has shifted significantly, and they are prioritizing what continues to drive engagement, which increasingly revolves around the women's individual stories rather than Kody's reflections. Meanwhile, the OG3 continue to gain momentum in ways that feel almost effortless. Christine's public appearances consistently draw attention, not because she is revisiting the past, but because she is fully embracing her present. Her confidence, humor, and openness about starting over resonate deeply with audiences who see her as someone who finally stepped into her own life after years of compromise. Janelle, on the other hand, continues to build her reputation as the steady, grounded force who turned emotional endurance into quiet strength. And Mary, once the most overlooked member of the family dynamic, is now unexpectedly becoming one of the most entertaining voices online, winning over fans with humor and authenticity. What stands out most in this new phase is the absence of conflict-driven storytelling from the women themselves. They are not engaging in public disputes with Kody, not using interviews to settle scores, and not feeding into ongoing family tension. Instead, they are simply living their lives openly, and that alone has proven to be more powerful than any confrontation. Fans are increasingly drawn to the sense of peace that now surrounds them. It feels earned rather than performed, natural rather than manufactured. According to people familiar with Kody's mindset, this shift has been difficult for him to process. He is reportedly aware that the audience response is no longer evenly divided. Where there was once debate, there is now a clear emotional lean toward the women's experiences. Viewers are not just watching for drama anymore. They're watching for transformation, healing, and personal growth. And in that environment, the traditional authority figure role that Kody once held no longer carries the same weight. This has allegedly led to frustration behind the scenes as Kody continues to feel that his contributions to the family story are being overshadowed. He reportedly struggles with the idea that the narrative can continue without him at its center. But the reality unfolding on screen and online suggests something very different. The story has already moved forward. And whether Kody fully accepts it or not, the focus has shifted permanently toward the women who are no longer waiting for permission to define their own lives. As the spotlight continues to shift away from Kody Brown, a new tension is quietly forming behind the scenes, and it is not just about attention anymore. It is about relevance. For someone who spent years at the center of a highly public family narrative, watching that narrative continue without him in the leading role is reportedly becoming increasingly difficult. According to insiders, Kody is not just reacting to the success of the OG3. He is trying to understand how the entire structure he once controlled has evolved into something that no longer needs him to function. One of the most discussed rumors within production circles is Kody's alleged push for more individualized storytelling. Sources claim he has suggested ideas ranging from extended personal segments to a dedicated special focused solely on his version of past events. In his view, the audience has only ever seen pieces of the full truth, shaped by emotional reactions, edited moments, and selective storytelling. He reportedly believes that if given a proper platform, he could reframe how people interpret the entire history of the Brown family. However, that belief appears to be running into a very different reality behind the scenes, where audience engagement data is telling a clearer story than personal perspective ever could. The numbers, according to industry whispers, show a consistent trend. Content centered around Christine, Janelle, and Mary continues to outperform traditional Kody-centered discussions. Whether it is interviews, social media clips, or lifestyle updates, viewers are more engaged when the focus is on growth rather than conflict. This shift has reportedly made producers more hesitant to invest heavily in Kody-led narratives, especially standalone projects that rely solely on his perspective to carry audience interest. In simple terms, the audience has moved on to stories that feel more emotionally rewarding. Meanwhile, the OG3 are continuing to expand their individual identities in ways that feel both intentional and natural. Christine's journey remains the most visible, with her public life reflecting freedom, joy, and self-discovery in a way that resonates strongly with longtime viewers. Janelle continues to build her grounded, practical brand rooted in stability and personal strength, while Mary's unexpected rise in popularity has added a completely new layer to the dynamic. Together, they represent three different versions of healing, each one connecting with audiences for different reasons, but all pointing in the same direction: independence. What makes this transition even more striking is how little resistance it seems to require. The women are not actively fighting for dominance in the narrative. They are not engaging in public disputes or attempting to rewrite history through confrontation. Instead, they are simply participating in life on their own terms, and that alone has proven to be enough to reshape audience perception. Fans are no longer looking for dramatic breakdowns or arguments. They are responding to authenticity, consistency, and emotional honesty. According to those familiar with Kody's internal frustrations, this is where the disconnect is growing. He reportedly still views visibility as validation, believing that being seen means being important. But the audience has begun to separate visibility from value. Just because someone speaks the most does not mean they are the most compelling part of the story. And in this evolving landscape, the quieter, more grounded narratives are resonating far more deeply than attempts to reclaim the spotlight. As a result, Kody's attempts to reinsert himself more prominently into the narrative are reportedly being met with hesitation. Not outright rejection, but caution. The industry understands that audiences are not reacting the same way they once did. And in a space where attention determines opportunity, that shift carries significant weight. The story is no longer about who once controlled the family. It is about who has successfully moved beyond it. And right now, that answer does not appear to be Kody Brown. As the Brown family narrative continues to evolve without Kody at its center, one of the most unexpected developments has been how quickly the audience has adapted to this new dynamic. What once felt like a tightly controlled family structure now feels fragmented into individual stories, each one moving in a completely different direction. And according to insiders, this shift has left Kody increasingly frustrated as he watches the emotional focus of the franchise drift further away from him with every passing month. Behind the scenes, there are ongoing whispers that Kody is still trying to regain some form of influence over how the story is being shaped. Sources claim he has repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with how the current narrative highlights the OG3's independence, while his own perspective feels increasingly sidelined. In his view, the story cannot be fully understood without his input. He reportedly believes that the emotional complexities of plural marriage, leadership responsibility, and family conflict are being oversimplified when told primarily through the experiences of the women who have moved on. But audience reactions suggest something very different. Viewers are not looking for justification anymore. They are looking for resolution. The women at the center of this shift continue to grow their individual identities in ways that feel both distinct and powerful. Christine's transformation remains the most visible, with her public life reflecting confidence, humor, and emotional freedom that viewers rarely saw during the earlier seasons of the show. Janelle continues to be viewed as the steady force, someone who turned years of emotional endurance into practical independence. And Mary, once seen as the most emotionally isolated member of the family, is now surprising audiences with her openness, humor, and renewed sense of self. Together, they have unintentionally created a narrative that no longer depends on conflict to remain compelling. This is where the contrast becomes most noticeable. While Kody reportedly continues to focus on reclaiming narrative control, the women have moved into a space where they no longer need to engage with that struggle at all. They are not responding to past tension or revisiting old conflicts. Instead, they are building entirely new lives that exist outside of that emotional framework. And that absence of reaction has become one of the most powerful elements of all. Silence, in this case, is not emptiness. It is distance. It is closure. Fans have taken notice of this change and have responded in a way that has only amplified the shift further. Online discussions are no longer dominated by debates about Kody's decisions or leadership. Instead, they are focused on the growth and transformation of the women who have stepped away from that environment. Viewers are analyzing old episodes with new understanding, reinterpreting past moments through the lens of what they now recognize as emotional imbalance and long-term compromise. What once looked like family conflict now looks like a system slowly unraveling from within. According to industry insiders, this change in audience perception is one of the key reasons Kody's influence over the franchise has diminished. Producers are reportedly more interested in narratives that continue to resonate with viewers, and right now, those narratives are centered on healing, independence, and personal reinvention. Kody's attempts to reposition himself within that framework have not disappeared entirely, but they are no longer driving the same level of engagement they once did. At its core, what is unfolding is not just a shift in storytelling, but a shift in emotional alignment. The audience has chosen where its attention naturally flows, and it is no longer toward authority or control. It is toward growth, authenticity, and the quiet strength of people rebuilding their lives on their own terms. And in that space, Kody Brown is no longer the anchor of the story. He is simply part of its past. As the final layer of this shifting dynamic comes into focus, what becomes impossible to ignore is how completely the narrative has changed its direction. The Brown family story, once dominated by one central voice and one controlling presence, has now evolved into something far more fragmented and, in many ways, far more powerful. According to insiders, Kody Brown is still attempting to process how quickly the structure he once relied on has dissolved into independent paths that no longer require his approval, participation, or validation. Behind closed doors, there are ongoing claims that Kody continues to believe the audience still wants his perspective, even if it is no longer the primary one driving engagement. Sources suggest he feels that the story of the Brown family is incomplete without his voice explaining decisions, conflicts, and emotional breakdowns from his point of view. But the reality reflected in viewership trends, social media engagement, and fan conversations tells a very different story. The audience has already shifted its emotional investment elsewhere. They are no longer waiting for explanations. They are responding to transformation. Christine remains one of the most visible examples of this new direction. Her public presence reflects confidence and clarity that fans associate with someone who has fully stepped out of emotional confinement. Her story is no longer defined by what she left behind, but by what she has built in its place. Janelle's evolution continues to represent stability and grounded independence, showing that strength does not always require confrontation. And Mary's unexpected reinvention has added a completely new emotional layer, proving that even the most overlooked stories can become powerful when given space to grow. Together, these women now represent something the franchise never fully anticipated. They are no longer defined by their connection to Kody, but by their separation from the emotional structure he once represented. And that separation has become the core of the audience's interest. Viewers are no longer invested in the mechanics of plural marriage as much as they are invested in what happens after it falls apart. What comes next? Who heals? Who rebuilds? Who finally chooses themselves? Meanwhile, Kody's attempts to remain relevant within the conversation reportedly continue, but with diminishing impact. Insiders claim that while he still seeks opportunities to reframe past events, those efforts no longer generate the same level of audience engagement they once did. The attention has shifted toward narratives that feel more grounded in personal growth rather than justification. And in that environment, authority alone is no longer enough to hold interest. What makes this moment particularly significant is that the shift was not forced. It did not come from a single dramatic event or a public confrontation that changed everything overnight. Instead, it unfolded gradually through consistency. Through Christine's joy, Janelle's calm rebuilding, and Mary's unexpected lightness. Over time, those individual changes formed a collective reality that the audience could no longer ignore. The story simply moved on because the people within it moved on first. And that is the final truth shaping this entire transformation. The Brown family narrative did not collapse because of a single argument or decision. It evolved because the women at its center stopped waiting for permission to live differently. They stepped out of a cycle that once defined them and created something new in its place. Something quieter. Something freer. Something that no longer needs to orbit around the man who once believed he was the center of it all. In the end, the story was never about who controlled it the longest. It was about who had the courage to leave it behind. And in that sense, the real ending was not an ending at all. It was a beginning the audience finally got to